How is everyone doing today? So, we are looking at some power rankings. For those that are not aware, we are 4 rounds into Swiss for ABC, and we actually had some interesting changes this season to the national tournament, to the Blizzard hosted tournament. It's got 400 or so teams in it. A little bit more than usual, might be over 400 teams this time, and it's looking pretty good. 341 teams, it looks like. Okay, still a little bit more than usual. There may have been some dropouts, etc. But we have had 4 rounds, and they are true Swiss rounds right now, where reseeding is happening between every match. For those that don't know, for the last 3 or 4 years when Blizzard has hosted this, they've used a platform where they have given us 2 matches at once, and then you play both of those matches. That is now gone. We are on true Swiss. We're going to be in a situation where by the end of 10 rounds, we will not have more than one undefeated team, and we're going to have, a very limited number of 7-3 teams get in, and those 7-3 teams will have been tested more ferociously than they were in the past. We should have basically no ability to get easy paths, though there are going to be some heartbreaker 7-3 teams. That said, we're not here to discuss 7-3 teams, though some of that will be. We are here to discuss the power rankings. So what I want to look at here in terms of how we've broken this down, I do want to first off plug Okra. Okra has been doing an awesome job. It's a committee that Dividing by Zero put together. They did their power rankings. We see this one came out, and this was back on September 9th. So this was kind of the preseason rankings before we got to see a whole bunch. I get the benefit now of showing you what my rankings are going to look like today. Now that we're 4 rounds in, we've even had some Nace play early season, couple other things. So what does it look like and what have we done? Well, for our top 20, I've already spoiled what our top 20 looks like. Our top 20 officially, my top 20 is going to look like this right here. That's what it would be today if I had to do my rankings. And we're going to sort of go through these. But I do consider these tier breaks pretty important. In previous rankings, if I'd published one of these earlier in this season, I would have gone ahead and put Northwood up here as well. I may even have put Northwood over here. But we did see a particularly interesting match between Northwood and Fishermen. For those people that are not aware, Fisher is fielding 6 teams. We have quite a few of those teams ranked here today, but Fisher is fielding 6 teams. Kind of silly. You can see UC Irvine is fielding 2 teams, and this is a case where there's multiple threatening teams. Anyways, Northwood, who was a top 3 team, went up against Fishermen, the second Fisher team, and that was a best of 5 series that was closer than it should have been. It was a little silly in terms of, okay, we have a player out on Fisher, we have Sam playing support over on Northwood, or it just was sort of like, this is messy. What is this? This is a little bit weird. That said, neither team looked like I would have expected Northwood to win that more heavily. As such, I've moved Fisher up a little bit more from my previous estimation of them, Fishermen that is, and I've actually dropped Northwood down to what I would consider a vulnerable tier. It is possible that we will find out that Maryville and Fisher Wisps are not actually better than that. I suspect that we are not going to find that. I suspect we're going to find one of those 2 teams is actually the best team. So that's why they have this tier to themselves. That said, this next tier should absolutely be considered a threat. Let's zoom in a little bit. This next tier is very, very real teams. If there were slip-ups, if someone messes up, has a bad game as they're going through the brackets, you could absolutely see either one of these teams dropping to what we're seeing out of Northwood as well as to Rutgers. Rutgers was dominantly the 4th best team. They were for sure the 4th best team and not the 3rd best team. And that was pretty thoroughly proven last season. Since then, they've added Aiko to the roster. Aiko was already at the school, but was not competing in Overwatch, and I guess they've been talked into it, neutral, then neutral drags along tap. Now they've got a pretty darn strong roster there with some god names, and even when they just had neutral, they kind of looked like a top 6 team, a top 8 team. Even before they had neutral, they looked like a top 20 team. Neutral and top got them up to 4. Is Aiko going to be able to break them through and maybe go, oh no, we actually can end up in this tier? I don't know. It's not as many contenders players or former Owl players as you see on these 3 teams, but it certainly is interesting. So that's where that is. Then we get through to this next tier, and I just don't really see a world short of something crazy happening where someone in this tier, something really, really crazy happening, anyone in this tier being able to win it all. It's just not real. I'm sorry. That said, these are still very good teams. If you run into one of these teams at a LAN, at a tournament, could they go win regional LAN? Could they do quite well? Yes, these are absolutely good teams. These are still top 10 teams that we're talking about here. And we are talking about UC Irvine. This is their lead team. Fishermen, which is the second Fisher team. Boise. UST, who we still have a limited track record with. UST doesn't compete in much in previous seasons. For quite a while, they didn't quite have a full roster, but they sort of would maybe compete in the occasional Tier 3 tournament, but not actual collegiate stuff because they didn't officially have enough players. They played for real last season, and in a big way. They didn't get a ton of matchups because they just played in ABC, but they came along, got blocked by Rutgers, could not beat Rutgers, but beat, some good teams on their way up. That kind of put them somewhere in they're not as good as the 4th best team, but they're like better than the 12th best team. That's a pretty big range. But that's kind of all the data that we got on them in terms of just their matchups in the 10 non-true rounds of Swiss, and then groups, and then playoffs there. So this is still a pretty variable team. And then Redbirds, some of you might be going, wait, Redbirds is a legendary program. They had the American Tornado, sure, they went away, but then they had other Owl players. The lead team for Redbirds is not actually competing in ABC. I'm still ranking Redbirds as a team because they do still have players, and my understanding is they are still competing in Collegiate over in NEC Legends divisions, for example, NECC, and I do still expect them to be a pretty good team. But the reason you're not seeing them up here, or at least up here, and you're instead seeing them, in my opinion, towards the back of this tier, is going to be because they do not have a whole bunch of former Owl players, etc. right now. They have good players, don't get me wrong, but they've got that. They also have a new coach system going on, so potentially not quite as connected. Maybe that'll hurt their ability to recruit. Maybe it won't. Maybe they're just keeping their powder dry to pick up Owl players as the season folds. That's what the rumors look like. But they do have a new coach. Flutie has moved on. And it's always a question of when you have someone new moving into an organization in a semi-permanent role there, like a coach or like a director or like anything, are they going to have the same institutional power to get things done, to continue to support the team? I expect in this case they will, because the director clearly is bought into esports over there, but just something to keep in mind. Then we're going to move on to this next tier. And in this next tier, again, in terms of why these teams are where they are, we don't have a ton of interesting matches yet. It is 4 teams of Swiss. I could go into a little bit more detail on why specifically I have teams exactly where they are. I talked about it a little bit already with the Fishermen versus Northwood thing, and, a little bit about roster adjustments. We just don't have a ton of interesting matchups at the top. Probably the most interesting one we've seen so far is Fisher Wisps did in fact beat University of Texas Dallas, but that's not super interesting. Every time you underrate Dallas for too long, they'll do something big. Usually that something big is taking out Northwood. They've done that 3 or 4 times now. When they start to drift in the rankings, get too low, they sort of reset themselves by taking out Northwood, that sort of thing. And they did do that, did get a good win post-ABC at the final sort of non-ABC national tournament that I'm blanking on the name of. They also did take out Fisher in a different one, what would sort of now be Fishermen, but ultimately they sort of have been slipping. They have been lacking consistency. They went 2 ABC seasons in a row where they missed playoffs. And for, a top 20 team to miss playoffs twice, you sort of start to get into, you just can't rate this team all that highly. They're not falling out of my top 20, but there's a reason that they're down here and not up here anymore. So we look at that, and that's just sort of some of the why we're getting into it. Sam on BAP is a scary sight. I mean, it's a scary sight in the sense of he might plug you full of holes, but so would any other true flex support player that they would field over there. So that's not really different, and the BAP does look less comfortable than a lot of true support players of the caliber that you can get at the real scary esport Overwatch schools. So scary sight in the sense of like, ooh, that's the best you guys can offer with what you're investing in the program. That's kind of scary that that's the best you can offer, or scary in the sense of yes, he's gonna gun you down. Yeah, I've got Bellevue pretty low, and I'll get into why in just a second. But as we go through here, I know another slightly hot take I have is I've put Illinois Orange ahead of ASU. I know for last season, I would have put ASU ahead of Illinois Orange for most of the season, but I do believe Illinois Orange got the win at the end of last season, and they've also upgraded their roster since. Chopper is back there playing DPS. This is a pretty easy decision for me, and I was actually surprised when I looked at the Okra rankings, that some of the other people at Okra did and saw Illinois Orange all the way down here at 17. Maybe the Scrimbucks are speaking differently and people feel like ASU was a tougher scrim than Illinois Orange, but I was surprised to see that. I like ASU, by the way. I thought ASU was like the story from last season of like they came on the scene, they did good, they surprised everyone. It's a very good team that will be a top 20 team, I hope, for quite some time to come. And that's really cool to see. You see, I have them in my 12 spot ASU, and I have Illinois Orange over here in the 11. So that's why I have those where they are. ASU did beat Oakland. Some people were ranking Oakland, not Oakland, California, Oakland, Michigan, and that's because Cry went over there. But one player just isn't enough anymore, guys. You actually have to put support around them in the collegiate world. One player just isn't enough. One player can be enough to turn some heads, to maybe pull some other players, or to drastically raise the level that you scrim at, which then causes the players around them to get better. But one player is not enough by themselves, so I was kind of surprised that obviously Oakland didn't make top 20, but that Oakland got the votes that it did. I hope that will now be corrected, now that we've seen, nope, that's not, in fact, going to be strong enough. You would say Bellevue should be lower. Okay. And then St. Clair. St. Clair made a couple roster upgrades. St. Clair, I thought, looked a little bit vulnerable for most of last season, but they turned it on for groups and playoffs. I remember looking at their group. They were a group that had 3 top 20 teams, so I didn't expect them to get through, but they made it through. And then they did just fine in the actual playoffs themselves. So they sort of, in my mind, turned it around a little bit. They've upgraded their roster a little bit since then. I think they've sort of locked in more. I don't think they're definitely not up here. They could, I suppose, be up here, but I think this is right for them. But I think them being in this tier and not really threatened by this lower tier is correct. I actually think this next tier is where things start to get waffly. If we're actually looking at good teams who I believe have some consistency and you can sort of trust and aren't going to have big flaws that lead to relatively easy upsets, these are the teams right here. This is about where the cutoff of the truly good teams are. Once we get below this line here, I actually think we're into these teams are too upsettable, too not practiced enough, too vulnerable to maybe a meta shift, to, oh, we haven't seen this strategy before, whereas teams above this line should be pretty solid and should be able to beat you either with they've just played long enough and are good enough that they can handle it, or they're just good enough that their players are fast enough that you will not be able to handle them even if you throw something you've never seen at them before. So this is sort of my line of suck. And that's not to say that teams like Converse and UTD and such are bad teams. They're definitely not. UCSD, for example, has gotten some higher up here upsets in the past, but UCSD also flounders all the time and loses matches to top 30 teams, even top 35 teams, dare I say. So they're sort of a perfect encapsulation of that, and UTD would be a similar thing, where one time they got blocked by the Utah Utes, and the Utah Utes used to be a good team, but aren't really close to top 20 anymore. Maybe that'll be a bold statement, but aren't really close to top 20 anymore. We've got a few teams that have beat them to establish things, and so clearly there's some vulnerability here, that sort of thing. Bellevue would be the perfect example to lead this team with. Bellevue's roster on paper should be quite good, and Bellevue should be a solid roster, and coming into the season, you'd have seen most people put Bellevue probably in this tier here. I almost didn't put Bellevue in my top 20. And that's because Bellevue is kind of disappointed in the past. I've looked at Bellevue and been like, you guys have a good roster with lots of former contenders players, and you're kind of in the bubble. It's been a while. It's been 2.5 years since Bellevue was really a good team. Like, Bellevue was like a good team. Bellevue was at their most relevant sort of coming into the modern era of collegiate Overwatch, coming into the most recent format. And by the most recent format, I sort of mean our let's do 300 to 400 teams in Swiss, not this season's most recent format of actually true Swiss, where, they showed up and they did well back when the third and fourth best teams in Overwatch were UCI and Utah. The top two teams were Harrisburg and Maryville, and you'll note Harrisburg is gone now. Harrisburg has folded their Overwatch program. They might have a club team competing, I don't remember, but it's not a club team that's like made up of most of who you would remember as the players. It's a true club team. It's not a, hey, we lost our funding and now we're playing. So that's why you're not going to see them anywhere on here. They're not a good team anymore. But that's a different era. That's like 2.5, 3 years ago that we're talking about. And Bellevue's sort of disappointed in my mind since then. Sure, they've made sometimes into top 20, sometimes into playoffs, but never at the caliber you would have expected. They upgraded players. They have 3 new players, gives them a nice old Shikigami core there. It should be quite good. But then we immediately hear about how over at Mage, that was a regional tournament, they lost to Iowa. You can't lose to Iowa. If your team is actually of this caliber, in this top 10 caliber, you cannot lose to Iowa. And is this just a case of no, Iowa is actually really good and Iowa belongs up here in the top 10? No, it's not. I am making that statement. Iowa is not a top 10 team. Do I have the losses from Iowa necessarily to back that up? I suppose not. I'm still pretty comfortable with it. Iowa top 30 team? Absolutely believe it. But a top 10 team, if you look at collegiate Overwatch, if you look at how that plays out, a top 8 team, how shall I put this? A top 8 team on a bad day might lose to a top 16 team. A top 4 team will not lose to a top 16 team. A top 16 team might lose to a top 32 team if they're at the back end of the top 16, but a top 8 team is just not losing to a top 24 team. It's just not happening. A top 8 team is not losing to a 19th rated team, for example. Like, it can't happen. And they had a ringer and it was in a really important position and it did a lot of calling for them and it was stressful because the event wasn't working as it was supposed to. Totally understand. Things happen at LAN. Subs make things harder. Totally on the same page, and I'd be willing to give some credit for that. But the problem is that does not change the fact that teams that are at this level simply play the game faster than teams at like a top 25 level do. Like, they literally play the game faster. It doesn't matter if you hit them with a weird strategy. It doesn't matter. Like, they're just better than you. It's the football equivalent of, it's great that your team is really cool at this. Our quarterback and receivers are a foot taller than your team. It just doesn't matter at some point. So, I look at that and, hey, people, I'm already seeing some of the comments of Iowa State has Zeb and Z-Man top 20 for sure. I look forward to seeing it. Iowa State maybe is top 20, but they're not above this portion of top 20. I just don't think it's true. And teams in this portion of top 20 do not beat teams in here. So again, Bellevue, cannot be in here. Even with a ringer, it doesn't happen. Illinois below line of suck? Why do you think Illinois is below the line of suck? Illinois did quite well here. Let me pull up last season's collegiate completion. Was this it? Is this the right season? Yeah, it is. This is how last season ended in playoffs here. And you can see a couple important things here. So we look at this and we see, okay, St. Thomas, this we mentioned, they beat St. Clair, they beat Illinois Orange, they lost to Northwood, they lost to, the team that, won. That can hardly, okay, we knew that they weren't as good as the top team. They were then able, after they dropped, to lose to Rutgers. There's no shame in that. Congratulations. They lost to the 1 and the 4 team, and they beat teams, in that season, and they beat teams that Illinois Orange would have been like a 15, a 16 that season, and St. Clair maybe would have been a 12, but a weak 12. Probably a little bit lower. Like, that's kind of why we have such limited information on them, and they still haven't played anything meaningful. And this was St. Clair's or St. Thomas's first real season going there. And then in terms of Illinois Orange, again, I'm going to look at this. Illinois Orange lost to St. Thomas. Okay, that's tough. But they did beat UCSD. And then when they dropped down here, they did take a tough win against Arizona State. And their roster looks better since then. They've added Chopper in a role that Chopper actually wants to be playing. Chopper was off that season over at Illinois. And then we see beyond that, ASU has not improved their roster. Now, maybe the scrim scene is telling a different scene. Maybe they're looking bad in scrims, etc. But I look at this and go, no, I'm going to keep Illinois above the line of suck for now. Fish teams will keep growing until Collegiate is only the fish. Maybe. That is definitely a possibility. Iowa State, one of the best non-funded teams. That's a club team, or at least it was a season or two ago. So, one of, sure, but yeah. Okay. Moving on. And again, ASU, this is a club team, or at least it was last season. So, I've liked that in Collegiate Overwatch, we've actually had a good mix. Yeah, usually it's varsity programs that make up more than half of the top 16 teams or so, but you always have a pretty good mix of club teams in there. And some of the varsity teams that make it, yes, they have a program. Yes, they have some, they have a full-time, maybe 2 full-time positions running their esports program, but, the players are frequently on pretty limited scholarships. They're not on ISU style heavy scholarships or, etc. Georgia Tech is a fully club team too? Sure. And Georgia Tech is threatening. Georgia Tech is not in my top 20, but there's a reason. This is a little bit of a cluster down here, the bubble. Or just outside the bubble, I'd say, in bubble, out bubble. But Georgia Tech could be up here. Georgia Tech could be over here. Georgia Tech could be over here. Georgia Tech could be over here. I don't exactly know, but I like them more from what I've seen than a lot of these other, they could be in the mix sort of teams. Okay, so moving on from Illinois Orange, we're getting, some comments on them in Iowa State here. Bellevue, I was talking about Bellevue. Their program has disappointed me. Their program has basically disappointed me, even when they had Crowley on the roster. Sure, they made it into the playoffs, but they didn't get the depth that you'd expect for the caliber of players that they had. They've kind of struck me historically as their players not really wanting to play Overwatch. They've told me before that their players didn't really want to be playing Overwatch in the past. Now, they have new players. They have players who are more into it. This should be a better team, but then they immediately make a hiccup against Iowa. And maybe Iowa is a top 20 team. But if I was a top 20 team, it's a 19 or 20 spot. It's not a 15 spot. You cannot, even with a ringer, be losing to a 19 team as a top 10 team. And according to their roster, they should be a top 10 team, which means, is there something funky with the program? Are they just not? Are they doing something wrong over there? Do they have a legacy and it's creeped in there? Do they have a player or two still there who are like, I don't want to be doing this? I don't know. But the evidence isn't good so far, and that's why they're sort of in the questionable threats. Like this team should be capable of playing up here. This team should definitely be capable of beating these teams, but they're flimsy, and you could just as easily, or perhaps just as easily, see them losing to teams down here. Yeah. Converse, obviously, their roster got a little weaker at the very end of the season last season. We'll see how they stabilize. They've obviously brought in a new player. They've got some stuff. They can no longer fall back on, let's bring in our Torb/ball player to fix it when someone jumps off the roster for one reason or another. Not the program's fault that those players are jumping out, and I'm not saying that those programs shouldn't have jumped out. Life absolutely happens, but it's happened to them a few times. So they've had someone who, was supposed to step back and just sort of manage the program, have to jump in and play quite a few times here, and he literally can't do that for them anymore. So we'll see what happens. I suspect this team will go up as the season goes on. This is where I put them right now, but I actually expect this team to go up more than I expect any of these other teams to go up as the season moves on. But for now, this is where I want to place Converse. University of Texas, Dallas. Obviously, there's some talent. We all know there's some talent over there, but whether it's a case of you can't make the team frequently enough take matches seriously, so they drop matches they shouldn't, whether they're participating in too many matches in previous seasons and that's caused them to be tired and drop, or maybe the program support isn't right, or maybe it's just not a good balance of players where they just want to fool around too often, and the longer time you spend fooling around, the less practice you get, the less better you get, and that could be why they've been slipping over time. I know they have some excellent wins at the end of last season. This is still where I'm going to go ahead and put them, and they do have a loss at this point. They are not a 4-0 team right now. Now, their loss is absolutely no shame. They lost to Fisher Wisp, one of the two best teams. So, hey, that happened. That's still data that we have here. Of the top 20, pretty sure only Rutgers and ASU. And Illinois, maybe. I don't know about them, though. That might be true now. I think that's probably true that of the top 20 that I'm looking about, this is a club team. This might be a club team. I don't know. This is a varsity program. This is a club team. This is a varsity program. This is a varsity program. This is definitely a varsity program. But Fisher's taking 3 spots. See, that's not even fair. Fisher's taking 3 spots with their varsity program. This is a varsity. This is a varsity. Yeah, this is varsity. This is varsity. This is definitely varsity. Definitely varsity. This is still varsity. And these are varsity. So yeah, it looks like it's just these 2 or 3 teams. I'm not worried because, again, this was a club. This is still, I believe, a club, and they were in there last season. And no, these are in the top 20. So, yeah. And actually, you can call this a second varsity thing if you want, or you could call it their club team. I'm not sure exactly how they've categorized it, but I could make the argument, no, this is their varsity team, this is their club team, so another club program. See what I did there? I'm not worried. This is a varsity program. I'm not worried. There's clearly been ability for non-varsity programs to, with talent, make moves and get in there. And again, we've got one in the 4 spot right now. We've got one who really made waves last season, one who really made waves the season before that. Yeah, it's cool. I like it. Okay, so then we were down here. Bryant Stratton. Yeah, this is about the right place for them, I think. I don't have a ton more to say on that. I think this was probably pretty similar to where Okra put them. Okra had them over in the 15 spot. We have them, what was this? 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So we have them in the 17 spot, it looks like. So a little less favorable, perhaps. But This feels about right to me. They're competing in ABC this season, which I really like. This has traditionally been a team that has competed in other stuff, sometimes NACE, generally NECC. They're in ABC now, which is like the true nationals of collegiate Overwatch, and I'm really excited to see what that does for them. I also understand last season they were doing a lot more of splitting time with their players, like their players would be focused on Valorant and then come play Overwatch and that sort of thing, and now their Overwatch roster is kind of focused on Overwatch. So I actually expect them to sharpen, but I do see they have players like Cyber and Slater back, and those are good players. I like Bryant Stratton. A couple years ago, Northeastern, would run into them once or twice a year, and those were some great matches. I like Bryant and Stratton, some of those players were on that team. Solid team, but not a team that I really think has any chance to threaten these teams based on what I've seen. And honestly, I think they're probably still getting their legs under them a bit with the with the returning players, new players, whatever you want to call it. And so they're not sharp yet. So they're in the place where they can fumble stuff. They may lock it down and become a team that doesn't fumble. This whole tier could lock it down and become teams that don't fumble. But at this point in the season, I do think they, based on what I'm hearing through the grapevine, have a little bit of shakiness to some of their play, much like have seen out of UTD, much like we just saw out of Bellevue, those sorts of things. Fisher, I mean, what do you want me to say? Fisher has a lot of teams. Yeah, yeah. Fisher Chips, they beat SLU. SLU is outside the bubble, but not far outside the bubble. I would guess SLU is a top 25 team, to be perfectly honest, so that's good news for them. On the other hand, they lost to BSC. So BSC solidified, no, we are serious. We belong in the top 20. I know there was a little bit of a drama question there. I never questioned that they were in the top 20. They're definitely a top 20 team. I just think there's a little bit of shakiness at where they are in the top 20. But they're absolutely, based on the information available, they're a top 20 team. Good on them for beating Fisher Chips. Fisher Chips will be fine. Fisher Chips will be just fine. Yeah, that Slatter guy is special or something. How you doing, man? How you doing? I still remember I still remember it was a best of 5 that we had. It might have been NACE playoffs, and I think it was you on the Soldier. Maybe it was you on the Torb on Busan, and just it was like, oh my goodness, they are doing such a good job of adapting over the length of the series, and you guys ultimately got the reverse sweep there. But that one was annoying. Yeah. Anyway, then we're gonna go ahead and move on to the bubble teams. These are the ones that I'm going to consider in the bubble because for me they make it to top 20. You look at this and you've got UCSD. UCSD, no real surprise here. UCSD actually does have the potential to strike up here. They've proven it before. They've even gone up here before, but they just can't consistently do it, and they seem to disappoint more often than they perform. That said, usually they'll still play at a level, even though they're hyper variable, that I'm going to put them in the top 20. And you sort of have to be in the top 20 if you can strike this high against teams and beat them. And they can, or at least they have in previous seasons, and their roster doesn't really look different in a way that's meaningfully worse. So I'm going to continue to put them here. If they keep raking up weird L's, maybe they go down, but like UTD, they'll probably stop themselves from free falling by picking up some wins against teams that you'd clock as better than them. UCSD beat us one time and we never heard the end of it. That's about how it goes. That is about how it goes, unfortunately. That's the thing about collegiate Overwatch. It's hard you can't really erase the losses. You have to sort of go, okay, well, it's hard work to erase losses. You have to win a lot of matches to sort of make people forget about it, to get past it. One bad loss tanks your rating. And that's how it works in any sport, though. Like, I remember I was at a wrestling tournament in my first or second year of high school, and I was going to it was probably my second year of high school. I was wrestling varsity, and the number 2 rated guy in the state, the number 2 seeded guy in the state, was at that tournament. And my next match, not the match that I was in, but my next match was supposed to be against him, and he lost. I'm sure he went on to do great things after that tournament. In fact, I know he won lots of matches that he was supposed to after that tournament. He did not hold on to that number 2 seed, and I beat the guy who beat him, which felt great. Then the you know, anyway. But the point that I'm making there is that was something where that's an example of you do not get to hold a good seed after a fumble. You just don't. Your seeding will take a crash. It's life. Okay. They're not on here. This one isn't actually mine. I stole it from Lion because mine won't let me log back in for some reason because this one is tier maker and I was on tier lists or whatever for mine, and the reset password server is error 500ing not working, so I can't change which teams are in here on mine. So I just asked Lion to make a quick adjustment to his because I did want Georgia Tech in here. If I'd thought about it, I would have put Ohio Esports too. If you actually look at my true sheet, Ohio Esports is on it in the bubble. They're not in a top 20 spot, but Ohio Esports for me would be it in the out bubble plus towards the lower end right now. Dreams of bubble, they're better than those teams. They are better than these teams. Okay. So continuing through here, Irvine has a B team. Irvine's B team has some players that you recognize that are really good, that are pretty good, but were basically just sitting on the bench on their varsity team. So they went ahead and said, nope, we just want to compete with a second team. But then they filled it in with some people that are a little less proven. I think this team is pretty real, but I always have concerns about second or third teams because they know they're not the lead team, and that tends to cause different levels of mental investment from the players on the team. And that may be the people that aren't the known names go, hey, I'm not willing to take this as seriously as some of the names that we know are willing to take it. And that causes dispatch within the team, or it may be a case of the team loses a match that the players that we know would expect to win. It's against players that they're used to beating, for example, and that really causes these players to tailspin and go, I'm not going to take it serious. I'm not saying for the specific players on UCI's second team that this I necessarily am going to go because these are the players that's going to be an issue, but that's a pattern that you see in these sorts of things. You have to remember Collegiate isn't exactly like Tier 3. In Tier 3 and Tier 2, like attracts like, and you don't really end up on high-level Tier 3 teams where one player is significantly or 3 players are significantly better than the rest of the team. And that Collegiate creates those situations, can pretty reliably or pretty consistently create those situations, and that's only exacerbated if you know you're not the lead team representing your school. UCI was solid. I don't know if they're in though. I'd agree. I don't know if they're in either. But the bubble is a pretty big place, right? So you sort of go until we can narrow it down a little. And really what it is teams below the line of suck just aren't consistent enough. So it's like, this team's better than that team, but they've got a bad matchup against this team, but that team doesn't know how to handle snipers, but that team gets rolled by dive, but handles brawl better than most things, and most teams are running brawl or poke, and it gets messy. So we'll see. UCI maybe should be outside. I don't really know yet. I haven't played them. I haven't scrimmed them. I am doing this off roster strength and off the matches that they've played at this point. Then we move on. We talked about UCSD, and I've got Ball State here. I think Ball State's probably the right team to put here. I have scrimmed against them, but it was probably one of their first or second week scrimming coming back from the summer at that point. They looked shaky at that point, but a lot of teams looked shaky at that point and honestly still look shaky compared to where they finished not them specifically, teams in general, compared to where they finished and how clean teams looked at the end of the fall, which isn't or at the end of the spring, which isn't surprising. They'd been playing for a full year together at that point with, minimal breaks, whereas now people have had a long break if they didn't scrim over the summer, or maybe it's their new teammates and things are going to look a little shakier. That's part of why things are a little bit more variable in the fall tournament than in the spring tournament. Hey, purified water. You're talking scrimming and stuff? Yeah, I hear you. Cool. So, Ball State, they were about Team 20, 19, 20, something in that range at the end of last season, both in my rankings, I believe, and in Okra's rankings. And now we see they didn't make it here, but if we look at the expanded rankings, I can guarantee you they were in the top 23. A lot of people had Ohio State than them, and that would have been a correct ranking in a lot of ways for people. I actually had them above Ohio State, and I believe the reason that most... What? Okay, that was weird. OBS had a hiccup for a second. I believe the reason that most people had Ohio ahead of Ball State, Ohio State ahead of Ball State, in their rankings for before would have been the Kentucky LAN, where Ohio State, these two teams are ESC rivals, along with Northeastern, but Northeastern got hurricaned out. And Ball State proved itself to be the dominant of these three teams. And then Ohio State was able to take them down, and even though they lost to Converse, who then lost to Maryville, it was a pretty solid tournament, which looks even more interesting with this new one where they're free inviting the top three seeds. We'll see how that goes. I think that's pretty cool, as long as if any of the top three seeds teams pass, they're going to move down the list to invite, and I think that's fine as long as they don't free invite anyone below the top 10. But tangent. Anyway, I know why they did that, but I also know that Ohio, there's two things. One, had graduated a player. Two, Ohio before the Kentucky LAN was not strong enough to beat this team. I know that. I'm aware of that. If they'd played 5 weeks prior, Ball State would have won. I'm pretty darn confident. I'm pretty darn confident that Northeastern or Miami, Ohio would have won as well. Ohio has clearly decided, or that season clearly decided, to really care about the Kentucky LAN, and it looked to me like they did that in the previous year as well, because in the previous year, they weren't a particularly good team, and then when they got called in with a seed to replace University of Texas Dallas, who had dropped out of the Kentucky LAN, they really ramped up for it, took it seriously, went let's train, etc., and played better than they'd been playing all season. So clearly there's some level of let's care about this, let's train for it, and I did not expect that to have kicked in at the beginning of the season, and I would say I'm right. I don't know if the Kentucky LAN is still what they'll specifically care about, but this team taking the loss they did, I suppose that's the big news that I should talk about there. This is a team that was a strong bubble team on most people's rankings. This team taking the loss to Rebel Gaming, was it? Yeah, to Rebel Gaming, who we're looking at over here, who is, a couple years ago, they'd have been a top 50 team. They'd be moving up. I don't think they're now a top 25 team. I think they're a top 30 team. I think they might be a top 27 team. Maybe they're a top 25 team. They've been clearly improving over time, but I think this is a case of this isn't Rebel stocks through the roof, they've gone wild. I think this is Ohio doing kind of what I expected Ohio to do. Ohio State better show up for this Big Ten tournament. That would be good. I know. Okay. So, New York Ultraviolets. New York Ultraviolets are a fine team. They're probably a top 50 team. I don't think New York Ultraviolets are better than like a UW or a UCLA or a Toronto. Ultraviolets might beat Penn, who's sort of been working their way down over time. Yeah. That's kind of where I'd go there. So yeah, that rounds out the top 20. Then we move on to Fisher's fourth team because why not? I think SLU is pretty good. SLU does have a loss at this point. They beat Terps, which is like a top 40, top 50 team. Terps, do I even have them in here? Oh, I have them in the Dreams of Bubble. Yeah. They also have a loss to Fisher Chips, so that gives Fisher Chips a little bit of support up here. Good for Fisher Chips. SLU is a solid team. Wins against SLU are real for establishing yourself as upper bubble, for sure. Um, Northeastern, some people might put them further that way. I've seen some things. Uh, Northeastern, like every team below this line, has weaknesses that, could potentially be exploited. They've also got strengths that, money printer go burr and win match. I mean, okay. So here we go. No, that was not me saying that they're bribing people. That's not at all what I'm saying. So we move on here. Grandview is back. Grandview would have been a top 12 team back when they had their best roster, probably a year and a half ago. They showed up, something like that, and they showed up on the scene. They were good. It was great. I remember we didn't scrim against them directly a ton, but back when SCAD was definitively a top 8 team, I believe SCAD's two most frequent scrim partners were us and Grandview. So we sort of got the indirect Grandview experience. And that was great. Grandview's team does not look as good as that roster that was a top 12 team. But they are back with some solid players here. I'm looking forward to seeing exactly what they accomplish. They did beat Toronto, who last season had no excuse not to make top 16. Instead, they fumbled, and it looked like Oregon was going to make it, but instead Waterloo made it. It's been a while since Waterloo's been like a good team, and Waterloo's not actually a top 16 team, but you know what? If Toronto, who should have been a top 20 team, fumbles, sure, they get through. And that's the thing. These teams are vulnerable. I think these guys actually hard fumbled. I think they lost every match in groups. They may have forfeited, whatever the case is. They're a solid team. And so there should be in the discussion for could they be a top 20 team again. But if they're, already sort of looking at, oops, we've had a little bit of a struggle. We've already taken a loss and, not to an amazing team. Well, okay, or maybe to an amazing team. Grandview establishing dominance over them. Good for Grandview. Yes, UCF does have a team, UCF Knights. UCF Knights I'd probably call them a top 50 team. We went against them in round one, and they were fine. Top 50 is probably about where I'd clock them. They, would roll most teams in this tournament because there's more than 300 teams in this tournament. But yeah, I do remember like a year ago, I want to say they went 6-0 in Swiss before they lost to Spring Break. Spring Break being, their players were away from the school and their opponents wouldn't reschedule matches, so they took 2 losses to that. But okay, you were good enough to go 6-0, then you take 2 of those losses, and then you can't lose because you're clearly better than a team that should have 2 losses, but you, I don't know. I don't know. They're not threatening top 20. I can tell you that much. They're not threatening top 25 either. It would take some real luck for them to make top 32. Okay. So in your defense, you had a diamond DPS for that game while you played main support. No, Cohen, no! No! That was a game that mattered, too. Though I understand Fisher Chips had moved their roster around as well. I believe because the rosters weren't locked yet, Paradox has told us, and I noticed this when I'm like, wait, Forgotten's on that roster? I thought he was on the other roster. They had moved people around so that because I believe Cabe was gone on this roster, they moved Forgotten over there. Maybe I'm mixing up their rosters at this point. So these guys might have been playing with a little bit of a different thing than they wanted to as well. Now I believe he is back on this roster, and they were allowed to do that. That wasn't cheating. Remember, the roster lock for ABC effectively locked on Sunday there. So you could move people between teams to accommodate for tryouts and things like that for the first 2 weekends of ABC. Okay, so now I move down here, and we get into our out of bubble teams. I've spilled enough stories about Northeastern. I've said what I thought about SLU. That's interesting info that you give us there about you guys having a Diamond DPS ringer. That's a shame because I know you guys, when firing on all cylinders, are top 25 team. We've got another Fisher team here because why not? I think after this, the Fisher teams fall off pretty hard, but I do think they have a fourth Fisher team that mixes it up. I'm not willing to write Grandview out and that they already have a win over a top 20 contender from last season is a great sign for them. And Pittsburgh should not be counted out. They were the team that they did not make it through groups, but they upset Harrisburg. And that was before Harrisburg's program totally imploded. Maybe it was on its way to imploding. Maybe the players were boomed. Maybe they knew that they had no future as a program, but the roster was still, oh, look, there's Elk, a former Owl player. Oh, look, there's a bunch of contenders players. Harrisburg wasn't folded at that point, so you count that as pretty real. Georgia Tech from last season, roster looks pretty similar. They were pretty good at improving. Miami, Ohio, they only had one player graduate, their main support. They, I believe, have moved their tank over to main support and brought in a new tank. Miami, Ohio has always sort of been a variable team, a more variable team. They're sort of the definition of the type of teams that go in here, but they can turn it on, and I know they will turn it on for certain rivals. But I would not count this team out. They've got a lot of looks from before, and this team in this bubble, on this side of the bubble, would not at all surprise me. And then obviously, Iowa has to be talked about. Iowa, of course, got the upset against Bellevue, and that's a big deal. That is a big deal. Why is a team that's up here and a team down here, why didn't Iowa move further? Well, maybe Iowa should have moved a little further. If you want to put Iowa over here, if you want to put Iowa over here, heck, if you even want to put Iowa in the 20 or 19 spot or even the 18 spot, I don't really object to that. I think those are potentially reasonable moves there. We'll ultimately see. But I still want results. And then Waterloo, we're sort of at this point. I think I didn't do a tier break, but I would sort of probably look about here-ish for a tier break. Waterloo obviously got into top 16 last season. They weren't really top 16, but they got into it. And hey, even finding a path speaks to you have to be close to be able to find a path. And they certainly, based on that, it would be hard to believe that they're worse than a top 30 team. It would even hard to be believed that they're worse than like a top 25, 27 team. Rebel Gaming, of course, beat Ohio State. People expect Ohio State was really good. I believe that less, but Rebel Gaming has been improving over the years, and hey, that's cool. That's very cool. UCLA, top 30 team. Toronto, probably still a top 30 team. Ashland, we saw sort of what happened over there. Again, that sort of thing. Mage, etc. UW, solid. And then we sort of get into, maybe teams. These teams are teams that you shouldn't be writing off. Gaming Gators, Penn State, even if Penn State is tracking down over time. UF Orange, that team is... if you haven't played against that team before, you should scrim this team. I'm just going to say to anyone who is below this line should make sure to get a scrim or two against this team throughout the season because they always feel a bit different than most other teams to play against. So they'll catch you if you're not ready, and you certainly won't be able to get practice against them after they've been announced as your opponents. So yeah, that's about what I'm looking at here. And then some of these things, these are teams that these are not close to the bubble. Blinn, all of their players effectively spread to the winds to other programs. Terps, fine. This I know they're 4-0 and they're like, oh, look at our impressive victories. I don't care. I don't care. You are a year ago's UW, where they had not gone against anyone good except maybe SCAD, and SCAD beat them, and they went, but we're 9-1. We are the best. We should be rated. And no, I don't care. That should fix itself this season. You know what? I'm going to look. I'm going to look. Is Illinois Wesley going to get kind of shown that no, you're not actually that? Let's see who they've got. Was supposed to have the full roster for Blinn, but unfortunate circumstances at the start of semester. Yeah, I hear you. Fisher Navy. Fisher Navy. I have Fisher Navy right here, and Fisher Navy will slap this hard. This will be a 3-1 at worst for Fisher Navy. I expect it to be a 3-0. I like Rit. Rit's cool. I think Rit's trying to host a local LAN. That'll be cool. They're not in the bubble. Kennesaw, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, sure, could have been in the bubble, could have been interesting. Again, it's been declining since then, as far as I'm concerned. Not in the bubble. The strongest argument for in the bubble of these teams is probably Maryland, and they're not. And by in the bubble, I mean in the outer bubble, not on the inside of the bubble that would put them in top 20. So yeah, that's about what I'd look at for my rankings. I'll catch up on chat now, but if people want to discuss, if people want to tell me about matches that they think I'm not aware of, if people want to yell at me about how wrong my rankings are, I will gladly tell you why you're wrong. I mean, no, please do. Please do. I enjoy it. This is fun. Felix says, I'm the old Wesleyan tank player. I don't think they will be up there this year. An entire roster change since we all quit. Yeah, that happens. Now, you can, with the right players, with the right coaching, with the right sort of legacy, take a big roster change and still continue to be competitive. It's my job to prove that. I just had a big roster change at the end of last season. But you can do that, but I agree, that does not at all look to me like, no, they're going to prove they're a top 30 team. They can, of course, try to prove me wrong, but I'm throwing shade. And apparently their former tank player is throwing shade as well. Hey, Felix. You think Navy and Chips are pretty darn close? I don't think there's actually all that much distance between these either, to be perfectly honest. I don't think this is a very big swing. This only exists as a tier because I do want a clean break between my top 20 and not top 20. I actually don't think there's very much distance. The distance between like a ball and a Fisher Navy, or a ball and a Fisher Chips, or an SLU and a UCSD, or a Grandview and an Irvine B, I don't actually think, or Pittsburgh, like, I actually think this is all pretty close, truth be told. And maybe Fisher Chip should be down here. That is quite possible. It is quite possible that Fisher Chip should be down in the bubble as opposed to riding at the very back of questionable threats here. Okay. Looking forward to Georgia Tech to face more teams around our skill level. Feels like we went from insanely easy schedule to facing Northwood. I hear you. We had a weird schedule as Northeastern. Our first week was harder than it should have been. We pulled Central Florida, who I think I said earlier is probably about a top 50 team, and UCLA, who's a top 30 team, and that's weirdly difficult for week one. It's not like, oh my goodness, poor us. It's just weirdly difficult for week one. But then in week two, we got McMaster B team, which we played them in Dive Party, and we just absolutely trounced them. So it was like, what? Why are we running into you when we have a 3-0 record? How did you get a 3-0 record? But hey, sorry, McMaster B team, but you were there. You know what happened. Support from Ashland here. I'm not sure how high we'll place this season, but we've made some roster changes. Don't know if it's enough to get higher than maybe top 30. Top 30 starts getting interesting. In top 30, things are flexible enough as far as I'm concerned. At the moment, they're flexible enough below top 13. As the season goes on, they're more likely to be flexible enough below top 17, that top 30 sort of becomes you can beat a 23 team in the top, you can be the 30th team and beat the 23 team. You can be the 29th team and beat the 25th team. You can be the 27th team and beat the 21st team. And, yes, that does improve your rankings, but it might go right back the next day just because it gets messy enough at that point. But it's also where a lot of the fun is. It's where a lot of the fun is because it's a little more inconsistent. It's a little more game day. It's a little more the collegiate experience. Well, what did this team have for breakfast versus what's that team? Well, how many players on that team are behind on projects and homework, etc., versus are on internships this semester, versus are stressed out about the fact that, their significant others, whatever. The collegiate experience where they're sort of balancing it all can really have big impacts in the outer bubble. Our win against Bellevue at Land was very interesting, but I don't know if that was a fluke or we have a chance. I wouldn't write you out. I wouldn't write you out at all. I've got you guys here, and I definitely wouldn't count you out. I've got you next to Toronto, and Toronto was a team that was at times in the top 20 last season. Absolutely real. You guys are, you're real in that sense. You're not real in the sense that I think you're going to beat a St. Clair. Maybe. Hey, if you guys really turn it on and go, no, we're headhunting, I want to see it. But, if you guys go, no, we're going to beat a UCSD. We're going to beat UC Irvine's B team. Fantastic. Let's see you make it into the top 20. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing what our story is this season. Again, last season, we had a nice story of ASU showing up with like, hey, we're here. Season before that, we had UCSD show up as well as Rutgers be pretty crazy. Last season, again, we had Rutgers really solidify themselves as the fourth best team, and I don't think that's moving anytime soon. We had another storyline last season of Illinois Orange going from a team that was always playing around top 20, maybe top 16 on a good day to, no, we're making ourselves a permanent fixture and we're moving up. Converse was a yo-yo where they were like in top 5 for a moment and then fell based on, okay, well, things happened. Them pioneering ball stuff, etc., didn't hold quite forever, that sort of thing. We had UST show up for the first real season and perform to the level expected, quite frankly. Not slip up, and that was kind of cool to see. So there's been some interesting storylines to look at here. This season, we already have a storyline going of how many freaking Fisher teams can actually stay in the top 20. Is Redbird's big brain move going to pay off, though this will more be a spring question, in the spring and have them right back up here winning it all? Or is this the end of that era? Did St. Clair lock it in? Are they real now and fully like, no, we're a threat? In fact, we can threaten these teams at the end of last season like it looks like they might have? Or are they going to sort of continue to hang around outside the top 10 and sort of go, we won't let other people in, but we don't really look like we have any ability to move up? Like, it's exciting. Is Bellevue a mirage, or is it just a, oh no, this is beginning of new team struggles, but not really a new team? A lot of those players have played together, and they'll be right back up here, and they'll be towards the top end of up here. That could be really cool. I am excited for this season. And I don't just mean the fall here. I mean this, entire academic season. Hey, Hedwig, how you doing? Which Fisher is where? I've got Fisher Wisps up here. That wasn't a big surprise, I know. I have Fisher Men up here. I moved them up a little. I believe they were over here, maybe over here prior. I moved them up over to here when they, in how I sort of, where I mentally had them before the match that, yes, they lost to Northwood. I did move Northwood down a tier, not an actual spot, but they were no, I did actually move them down. They were further over, and then I moved them down to here, so down a full tier. Fisher Wisp, Fisherman, Fisher Chips, Fisher Navy. I agree Fisher Navy and Fisher Chips are pretty close. that Fisher Chips has a win over SLU is actually giving them credit in my mind, even if they've also got the loss to Bryant Stratton. Um, I do believe SLU is a top 25 team. It is. It is. Let's roll. Utah was the team that came out of nowhere. Yes. Yes, I agree. But again, I've been in the collegiate scene just barely long enough to remember that when they were just a regular top 4 team. So they came out of nowhere to the new generation. To me, it was like, it's kind of weird that they're not threatening top 20. It's kind of weird that where's this? And they have sort of been downshifting over time. I remember when they were a top 14 team. I remember, I sort of remember the way down. And I do think that was their last hurrah, unfortunately. Blocking, they put up a good fight. I remember against Fisher. I don't remember what happened with them in St. Clair. I think that match happened. I remember in the first half of the season, or maybe the second half of the season before the split, they blocked UTD one of the semesters from getting into playoffs, and got in themselves, and that was cool. And then I think that must have been first semester, and then second semester, maybe it wasn't. Second semester, I remember hearing reports from Fisher that, whoa, this team is better than we expected, sort of thing. So maybe, but I think they've now graduated their best player. I could be wrong. And they also have a loss that I just think is disqualifying to them. And Utah is a team like Ohio that I know has historically ramped up their practice for things that they specifically want to do well in. So like, hey, we'll practice very lightly, and then for playoffs, we'll move our scrims up and scrim like 6 times a week when before we were scrimming once a week, if at all, sort of thing. Like, so they are a team that has historically done that, but I want to say they graduated a key player, and they did take a loss to Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech is no joke. Like, don't get me wrong, Georgia Tech is no joke, but I don't think we're going to see the resurgence of Utah. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we're going to see the resurgence of Utah. Utah Utes. There are 2 Utah teams. There's Utah State and Utah Utes. And it's the Utes. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. That are. Oh, I'll pull them up. Fastest way to pull them up might actually be through Georgia Tech. Do I have at Illinois Wesley? At Gaming Gators. Gaming Gators with an interesting loss. I believe this is their lead team because it says A team. That could be A team, and then they have a varsity team. I don't know. But losing to Miami, Ohio, no question there. But losing this is surprising because I have no idea who the FIU Panthers are, and San Francisco is usually a top 40 team. So that's a little bit weird. I actually want to see. We're going to go investigating because we're here. Huh. No, they have a bad loss too. They have a loss to, yeah. So Gaming Gators fumbled because this team lost to ASU, which is no shame. Beat Columbia, but then lost to TXST Esports. I don't think this team is real, which I think means the Gaming Gators just messed up. But this might be a team to pay attention to. Um, this loss isn't bad at all. This is a good win. This is just weird. And that's actually a reasonably good win too. Um, just Columbia, I believe. Let's take a look. I don't think that's not the Ultraviolets, so that's got to be a second team. Got crushed by Ashland. Interesting. Okay. Auburn's only lost is Fisher Navy. Just saying to keep an eye out. I'm aware of Auburn because we rolled Maryland, BS You rolled BSC in what? Um. Okay. Okay. I know BSC. I'm aware that BSC has had some last season had some ups and downs and had weak moments. I'm definitely aware of that, but um, still, yeah, I'm aware. I can only fit so many teams here, guys. Like, I don't think Auburn is a top 25 team, and the truth is, if you're not in the top 25, I don't feel that bad about not getting you on this graphic because if you keep adding logos, it starts deleting logos and it starts getting a little random in the logos it deleted. And I don't want to, oops, we deleted, Northwood when we were trying to add Auburn, or oops, I wanted to go make sure, like, yes, it would probably be appropriate to delete Harrisburg at this point. This is a duplicate of University of Toronto. This is the Utah Utes. So yeah, this is Utah Utes. And they are the team that, back in the day was one of the four best Overwatch collegiate programs. Well, teams. Okay. 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 So, do we have anything else? I'll scroll up and see if I missed anything else interesting. Heard Northeastern stocks have gone up with the Zarya Gaming Zarya meta. I mean, people are undecided on whether it's a Zarya meta, but yeah, yeah. Um, it's true. Northeastern does have the Leo Zarya Gaming. What do we got here? The wrestling lore. Yep, yep. Never heard the end of that. There's Slatter. We talked about that. Mm-hmm. Fish teams taking over. They probably will. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if Fisher is really going to be able to keep teams 3 and 4 motivated. I really doubt they'll be able to keep teams 5 and 6 motivated, even if they're on some form of scholarship. And I have questions about how motivated they'll be able to keep teams 3 and 4. Maybe, maybe. I think you're going to have some of the players on teams 3 and 4 feeling like, oh, I've been thrown down here with the rejects. What gives? I'm better than these guys. I think it's going to be very hard to avoid that. And that's not because I think, oh, they're not going, that the people running the program aren't aware that that's a threat and aren't doing things to try and address it. I'm sure they are, but that's just a hard thing to beat. That's what we would call it back in my day. IMF. I love it. I love it. I wonder what that was in reference to. Was that the? Oh yeah, that was probably in reference to when Utah and Irvine were schools 3 and 4. So yeah, when Irvine was a top 4 school there, or maybe it was the Bellevue story. Well, I guess I used that as the Bellevue story. Okay. Oh, the scarf. Thank you, Blah. Thank you, Blah. The scarf will make a brief appearance. Bellevue lower. Yeah, so our Iowa fan thinks Bellevue should be lower. Interesting. We are Zarya Gaming too. Nice, nice. Thoughts on Mizzou? Tuning in late. I like Mizzou. I like what Mizzou does. Mizzou has basically, for the entirety of their program's existence, punched above their weight. Obviously, once they lost their former Path to Poverty player, I want to say it was. I'm blanking on his name. Square One, excuse me. Path to Poverty is the real name. I came up at the same time as them, so anyway, as the same time as they made the name change, like I promoted with the team at the same time they promoted. Anyway, so what was I looking at there? Obviously, they were a stronger team when he was there. He graduated and they fell off pretty hard, but they still punched way above their weight class even at that point. It was like, you guys should be a flat Masters team, like a flat Masters team that's like, no, we'll take out the 4-2 teams. We'll take out some of the 4-3 teams. Like, what are you doing? What are you huh? And obviously they lost him. They lost some of the staff that was really engaged over there that I think really made it priority for them and really put a lot of mental energy into making that team good. So, there's some things, two staff members that they effectively lost there, as well as the former Contenders player. But they since then have continued to just punch above their weight class, and now they're trending back up. So I think they're solid. I don't think they're top 25. Could they be top 30? Yes. Is top 30 punching above their weight? Probably also yes. But I would I would not write off that team. If you're below this line, I would not write off a challenge from Mizzou. There's teams you should definitely win the challenge from Mizzou, but that's something that you would want to take seriously. Like, even though you should just roll them, you should take it seriously. You hit scan, got PTSD? Yeah, yeah. Any of you higher at the top now? Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to. I don't think I'm not that much of a homer. My rankings are pretty pure in terms of how I treat them. UKYW. So you guys got the win. Auburn got the win against them against BSC and NECC Spring 2023. I like the players that BSC has brought back. I like the players that BSC has brought back. I think those are good players that make this team better. And we're talking if you change two players, that's 2/5 of your team, for example. So like that kind of matters. We made Northwood lose their map when they went hog and play a real comp at least. Yeah, unfortunately, my response to that is first time. The top teams in Collegiate have a long history of not taking you seriously until you make them take you seriously. And it's why we don't really rate maps unless we watched with our own eyes. We don't go, well, Fisher Wisps lost a map, or Harrisburg lost a map, or, we really don't do that because we know very well that the top teams troll until you make them take them seriously. In fact, Rutgers got their first win, because it was actually funny because like a team trolled, so Rutgers got the first map, and then Rutgers was able to get a second map, and then that's a win against a top team. And then the same thing happened to another team like 1 or 2 weeks later, and you're just sort of like, guys, like you can't be like, oh well, they were trolling. Like, yeah, I know that is to some degree what happened, but like, there was warning. You saw that another top 3 team or top 4 team lost to them, and you went, we're still not going to take this team. What are you doing? By the way, Rutgers has done plenty to prove that even without that, they're a top 4 team and they own that 4 spot. But it's the top teams have a history of doing that. What actually surprised me more is I saw Rutgers dropped a map, and Rutgers does not have a history of fooling around the same way. So that Rutgers dropped a map to someone actually surprised me, because is that a sign that now they are going to start fooling around because now they just feel like we're just that much better than these other teams? And then you start dropping a map and you get serious and win? Or is it a case of they're not as locked in, strong, clean as I expect them to be? That's fair. We know they weren't trying the best. I'm glad we didn't fall to them trolling. Right. And you still want to be able to do that. Like, teams that can make a Northwood or a Fisher Wisp or a Maryville or an Irvine or a Boise play seriously, teams that can make them play seriously or risk losing are better than teams that they control against. And they control. These guys control against top 32 teams and be just fine. But trolling against a truly top 16 team, maybe they can't full troll against top 32 teams, but they can get a little wild and still outmuscle those. They can definitely troll against top 50 teams, no sweat. No sweat. Yeah. And hey, sometimes they control against top 8 teams. but they can't, if you can make them not troll, that is your first step to greatness, to leveling up, to whatever you want to call it. Anyway, I think we're going a little bit into. I don't think we're covering anything wildly new here, so I'll give people another 30 seconds to throw a comment in there. If you have anything, please do get it in there. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Do feel free to drop a like. Make sure to subscribe so that you see more of these. Definitely do keep an eye out for the next Okra rankings. If I take a quick look at when those are supposed to post, that is going to be those are supposed to post, from what I understand, on Saturday. I don't think I'm spilling any secrets on that. And you guys have a pretty good idea of what my top 20 rankings look like. And I am one of the voters in that, but I am one of 20 voters in that, so I don't overpower the rankings. You should definitely make sure to keep your eye out for that. Keep in mind, people will be voting on Wednesday, and by the time they post on Saturday, Match 5 or Match 6 may have been played, maybe both. I don't know. Maybe they'll post in the morning before anyone's played, but if they posted later in the day, we could look like fools because, some of these matches might play out and there might be huge upsets. But definitely check those out. And, follow me on Twitter as well. Sometimes I post stuff, whatever. But yeah, now I'll check back to see if there's any final comments. Thoughts on Kurt Kim's list? Let me take a look. Is this Kurt Kim, or am I pulling that up from Twitter? Can you link it? Because I've probably seen it in Okra, or am I pulling this up from... Oh, interesting. Interesting tank there. Interesting take there from Paradox, but I can't share that because that's in a private chat that I'm going to respect and keep private. Let me see if I can quickly find... Oop, that's not what I'm trying to do. Let's go here. Let's see if he's linking out to his socials there. He's not, so I'm going to have to go find it. Are there any matches I'm looking forward to? Absolutely. I think we've got great matches in general. Let's close this out. Let's go here. Let's go over to our matches. I think there's plenty of good matches. Matches I'm looking forward to. Yes, lots of them. Before, in the previous rounds, you had to hunt for good matches. Now there's lots of good matches. I don't know why it's starting with these rather than starting with my... Really? I don't know why it's not starting with my highest ranked matches here. There's a way to make it do that. Let's go in here and let's navigate over to get them. NEU versus BSC? Yes. That'll be exciting. Yeah, there's plenty of matches that I'm looking forward to. So we have a couple interesting things here. This will be a little bit better of a test for Bellevue. If Waterloo wins that, Bellevue stocks are penny stocks at this point. I mean, they're not actually penny stocks, but that would be really bad for Bellevue. And Waterloo isn't free. Waterloo isn't, I don't think Waterloo is a real threat for top 20, but Waterloo isn't some top 50 team. This would be another case of, okay, you've lost to Waterloo, you've lost to Iowa, you've lost to Ashland. You can't do that. That's not okay. In terms of interesting ones, how did you even get here? Yeah. I'm sorry, Mizzou, you guys aren't good enough to beat Ball State. Sorry. Looking through here, I have pulled this up. Grandview will not be able to take the modern incarnation of St. Clair. Iowa will have a chance to prove themselves against a very real team in ASU. Things that I'm looking forward to. This is probably a preview of the championship match. So, yes, I'm looking forward to this one. I'm looking forward to this one because this is actually kind of the match almost exactly what I wanted for Northeastern. I was looking for something for their next match, probably in these two tiers. I very much wanted a team from these two tiers as Northeastern's next match because Those are winnable. Um, this isn't. Sorry, Northeastern, but we're not ready for these two teams. And these would be harder to learn from than something in these two tiers will be is exactly what I wanted for Northeastern. Hey, QG put me in against Wisps. I'll roll them. There you go. So let's go back here, and then other ones that were interesting here. Nothing too interesting. This is page one. I'll jump to page two in a second. These are my two most interesting so far, obviously. Plenty of fine matches. Like, this is a fine match, honestly. Miami will win, but this is a fine match. This is kind of interesting. The Ball State's going to win. This I care about as proof for Bellevue. This I want to see. St. Clair's is going to win, but I want to see how real Grandview is. Oddly, Omnit Gold isn't bad. And I'd like to see Toronto reestablish themselves against a team that isn't bad. Cali sports stocks are fine, and are they now better than Penn State? They wouldn't have been better than Penn State a year ago. Are they now better than Penn State? Either from them getting a little bit better or from Penn State sort of just drifting down. Maybe I'm overblowing Penn State's drifting down, but it sure seems like it. And then Rebel Gaming has something to prove. Sadly, I don't think this is the place to do it. Rebel Gaming needs to win this match, but Rebel Gaming has something to prove in terms of, hey, was your taking down Ohio State University a real statement for you, or was it Ohio State University isn't as good as people think right now? They'll be better later. Um, and now we're into less interesting matches on page two here. Washington rolls that pretty hard. Bowling Green isn't terrible, but Washington rolls it pretty hard. And these are teams with losses because I know McMaster B team, we gave them a loss. Okay. So yeah. 1v5. Is Michigan on your list? We go against them this weekend. They're not. I didn't place Michigan. Again, there's only so many slots on the list, and I'm less worried if team 36 isn't on my list. I'm less worried as long as I have teams that I think are. I think all the real contenders for top 25 even are on this list right now, with the maybe exception of Ohio Esports. Maybe Ohio Esports is probably more top 30. But I think all the real contenders for top 25 are on this list right now, and that works for me. There's always going to be surprise stories. Like I said, the truth is, right now, everyone below this line can lose silly matches, and I suspect by the end of the season, we'll still be in a case of everyone below this line can lose silly matches. SLUV Converse on page 2. Ooh, that actually is interesting to me. Let's go back to page 2. Converse will win that. Ohio Esports will win that. UCL will win that. Oh, Rowan versus Fisher Chips. Fisher Chips wins that easily, but Rowan, okay. Where is it? Where is UTD versus Drexel? Drexel's dead. Winthropy's win. Yeah, that's actually I'd like to see as well. I mean, Converse will win that. Don't get me wrong. Converse is not going to slip and lose that, but I don't think Converse is locked down in their performance yet. Maybe I'm underestimating them. I think they're still in a little bit of a oopsies can happen, and SLU is a team that could cause an oopsie. Converse still wins that 8.5 out of 10 times, but that's an interesting match to watch. Maybe 7.8 times out of 10. UTD lost to Wisps. That's not surprising at all. Wisps is a top two team. UTD having lost to Wisps is just like, yeah, it's Tuesday. What do you want us to do? Like, what do you want us to do? It's Wisps, man. It's not that it's not bad. I mean, it'll give them a free round or two after that. Not that they need a free round or two. And again, it's going to be a pretty big deal this time. It's going to be a pretty big deal in terms of what happens. It's not just going to be about your record. It is going to be about the tiebreakers. It's usually about the tiebreakers, but the tiebreakers will be calibrated much better this time based on truly recalculating on Swiss each match rather than every two matches. That's going to make the Swiss a lot better. And some 7-3 teams are going to get in, and I'm really hopeful based on what I'm seeing that the 7-3 teams that get in are going to more consistently be the better 7-3 teams. I also think we're going to get better match quality in Swiss. I think we're already getting better match quality in Swiss than we have in previous seasons. Maryville is a contenders roster plus out. Yeah, yeah. Okay. That's gonna do it, guys. I mean, it all starts looking pretty contenders heavy. Like this is a contenders roster. This is a contenders roster with some AL players. This is, we're looking at three real contenders players here. This is a bunch of contenders players with some AL players mixed in there. This is a bunch of contenders players. This is a bunch of contenders players. We certainly see contenders players here. You see where I'm going with this. Then we get into okay, one contenders player, one former contenders player. They start to fall off after that, but we've got a lot of that sort of thing going on. I mean, we don't, but we take them if they want to go to if those contenders and former AL players want to go to a really academically good school that does a great job of getting people into the fields because we have those co-ops and those co-ops are great for actually making the networking and connections and work experience happen that actually gets you jobs. Just having a degree doesn't get you a job and actually gets you high paying jobs. Northeastern would be a good place for those former contenders and AL players to go to make sure that they actually have a good career afterwards. Yes, I am going to run an advertisement during my stream because it's my freaking stream and I can do what I want. Yeah, I know. Come to Northeastern, guys. I can give you as much help if you're a really good Overwatch player to get you in. Your grades have to be very good. Okay. That's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Temporal.